I'm here with Amir, CEO of CardiaCare. Amir, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about the medtech market. Compared to this time last year, where we had you in Barcelona, now we're here in Sintra. Is the market better, worse, or the same as it was last year, and why?
It's a bit mixed. I would say the market overall feels better. There's more deal activity. You're seeing more rounds closed. M&A activity continues to pick up. But I'd say you still have your valley of death for a lot of the early stage startups, those that are not seeking 30, 40 million in rounds, but really looking after, 1 to 5 billion. Mm-hmm. And I think those startups are continuing to struggle, although I'm seeing some of them refine their strategies, figure out what milestones are really important, and then try to get there. So I'm starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think it's a train, so I feel like it's a positive signs.
Let's talk about that challenging period, that valley of death for companies. I fear that with the way the general venture market is going, that valley of death may be here a little longer than we think. Look at the overall vintage of companies, 2020, 2021, the corrections in the market we've seen, the top decile of funds maybe returning 1x from that vintage, which is really going to impact the smaller funds and their ability to raise that subsequent fund to capitalize companies in that stage with those $1 to $5 million checks. The big mega funds are going to be fine, but what's the reconciliation pathway there now look like for these companies coming out in a market where they may be less of those small funds raising funds 2 through 4?
Yeah, I think for the companies that are younger, it's almost probably easier because their cap tables are cleaner, their history is cleaner. From companies that were raising in 2020, 2021, now looking at raising extensions, the cycle of the endless bridge, I think those companies are struggling because they are looking at, hey, we've already raised 15 million. We're looking for an extra 3 to get us, an extra year and get us to clearance. And their valuations are sky high from past rounds. So they're having to do down rounds. And I think those companies are struggling, because I think if they're VC backed, especially, the taking the medicine and doing the down round is not easy. Mm-hmm. But I think on top of that, I'm seeing companies still struggle with trying to survive versus trying to thrive, which sounds very cliche, but really I see companies that their go-to strategy is, I'm going to raise another bridge, another convertible, and I typically will ask them, well, have you done convertibles before recently? Say, yeah, this is our third. Mm-hmm. So then that hurts investor confidence because the convertible is only supposed to be a pass the baton to the next round. So when you're on your third, fourth, fifth convertible, the question is, are we just buying you more time?
Yeah.
Versus are you really going out and setting a strategy and trying to achieve it, hit that value inflection point? I actually see companies have an easier time, and I try to explain this to them, raising a $5 million equity round with very clear milestones with that uptick for the next stage of the company versus a company that's just trying to survive on a $1 million convertible note. Mm-hmm. So I think that also is affecting the smaller VCs because the smaller VCs rely on those co-investors, the rest of the market to help them get to the next stage. That's kind of also the valley of death for the small VCs.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of where that combo has made it tough and where you just see those $40 million rounds all the time now, powered by the larger VCs that are doing pretty fine.
It's obviously the responsibility of a savvy management team to be able to clearly articulate the capital they need to reach the next value inflection point and communicate that to investors. But setting price at that value inflection point is a two-way street and largely driven in a lot of ways by the investors that are capitalizing that company. You mentioned a really challenging reality for companies that raised in a market that has since been corrected. And to put it more bluntly, come down, 25% on what those companies may have been able to raise at in 2020, 2021 when capital was moving fast. Who's to blame? Having worn the operator hat, continuing to wear the operator hat, having worn the investor hat, continuing to wear that hat, who's to blame for this?
Yeah, it's hard to put blame. I feel like in the operator role, you run by the mentality, you strike when the iron's hot, you strike in the market, you play it out, and so do investors. So I kind of feel like everyone's to blame. You can call it the market, you can call it the Fed, you can blame whatever you want.
It's compelling to blame the Fed.
Yeah,
it's a lot easier.
Yeah. Sorry, Jerome. Yeah, I think companies realized pretty quickly, well, we might have not set ourselves up for success. And I feel like my best advice to startups has been try to work with momentum, but try not to get sucked into the market because the market can change in 6 months. It can change in a year. And so stick to what is sensible strategy. At the end of the day, if you're in surgical robotics, and for these 6 months it feels really weak, but long term you've had a strategy, you've had a vision, play it out versus just assuming, hey, right now is not a good time, I'll raise in 6 months and then it'll be back to rosy days. Play a sensible strategy that you think wins in any market, and that helps you survive and thrive over time.
You also mentioned kind of the defrosting of M&A, improving market conditions overall. And we had a busy first half of 2024. We've seen a real dedicated, cogent strategy from J&J in the cardiovascular space. You've seen Edwards make some big moves, both via the sell-off of critical care and now new acquisitions. That's a good tide as far as liquidity back to investors and liquidity for funds. But I also fear that we've seen a lot of consolidation at the strategic level now. You take Shockwave off the table, right? Silk Road off the table on their path to being able to actually acquire anything themselves. How do you think about this now, taking on a new CEO role, about what this will look like in terms of the field of strategic acquirers that will be there when you are ready to exit?
Yeah, this is something I think about all the time now. I think the M&A activity is fantastic because it shows life in the market, shows transactions. Even if they're bigger funds, they're getting liquidity. Their early stage funds are then helping, kind of the trickle down effect. They're helping the smaller companies. So I think it helps. However, I totally agree when you have a consistent 3 companies being the acquirers and then they're swallowing up companies like Shockwave and others that have the scale big enough that they can be doing a lot of tuck-in acquisitions, as Shockwave is starting to do, for example. I think those companies make it a bit tougher because medtech really thrives off the mid-size and tuck-in acquisitions. I think that makes the ecosystem very vibrant. I think these spin-offs are going to help. I've been seeing that as a really positive sign. A lot of companies are deciding we are this, and I think startups are doing the same. And I think so Edwards is helping the market. I think, J&J's consolidations, but also reconfigurations of the company, that helps. I think the whole 3M and Zimmer, I think all of these spin-offs end up creating more vibrant environment. And hopefully, once they kind of reconfigure how their companies are working, I think they're going to then step into the M&A market as well. Probably not for $13 billion acquisitions, but I think the market doesn't live and die off the big ones. I think, a bunch of sub 100 or sub 300 acquisitions, that's what, would really charge up the innovation market.
Absolutely. I want to maybe push a little on the efficacy long-term of these tuck-in acquisitions, because a lot of them come with an upfront cash payment, but truly the value being realized in LTIs. And we just saw, although it was a much larger acquisition that had the genesis here, we just saw a really, consequential court ruling on J&J's behalf with their acquisition of Auris Health that resulted in a lot of those LTIs having not been paid out as part of the integration and changing of milestones, and a big hit to J&J to have to pay out about 50% of those LTIs that never hit.
Yeah.
You've been on the strategic side after selling a company and integrating that. How can you speak a little bit about integration and some of the challenges there, and how do rulings like this and challenges in integration maybe demotivate buyers from some of these tuck-ins, or motivate them to maybe think differently about the financial constructs in place when they're trying to augment existing business units like J&J is doing with cardiovascular?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite tough. I think from the strategic side, a lot of them cannot play the super long game. I think something like Oris, that was certainly early. I think with other types of acquisitions, it's been very clear what can be accretive in 2 to 4 quarters is kind of the hot ticket right now. I see that as potentially challenging for the early stage and the tuck-ins, because at the end of the day, when you're in the strategic spot, then you realize, hey, we have limited resources. R&D is not infinite, and our R&D is now primarily focused on basically integrating these acquisitions as opposed to just complete organic R&D. So I feel like there is some consideration. I tell this to startups all the time. You are pitching as in this company with infinite cash as infinite personnel resources, and it doesn't. And then not just to finish any developments, but then is the sales force complementary, or they're going to have to basically create a whole new call points and new infrastructure to sell your product? If so, assume you have a very uphill battle, and you'll only probably get there if you then go commercial and really prove out the market. And then you get a big premium at the end of the day. But that's a very long financial path. So I'm seeing some glimpses. I think PFA was a great example where companies kind of made a 2-year play. I think that's pretty rare these days. I saw that with Farapulse and Affera, both great acquisitions by Boston and Medtronic respectively. And that played out extremely well for Boston this past quarter. Their numbers were they were comparing with like NVIDIA for percentages. Right. So I think there are some hopeful areas that I think strategics can alter their strategy, that it doesn't have to be fully baked, but it's in a direction where the development is done, the clinical is done or almost done, and they're in that deep pivotal phase. I think those type of PMA products have a lot of hope for tuck-in acquisitions.
One last question. You're taking on a new role as the CEO of CardiaCare, having founded and exited a company, been a strategic, been an investor, seen the industry from all sides, and maybe looking outside of the industry for a moment. I'm going to present a thesis that I want you to challenge me on as a way to explain where you're going with CardiaCare and how this is going to succeed. Take a fund like Founders Fund. Their motto, their mantra, they never replace the founder at the helm of the company. And the reason they never do that is they look at the field of generational companies and they say, Meta, Facebook, Zuckerberg, generational founder, CEO. Tesla, Elon Musk, generational founder. You go across the board here. Tell me now, you're coming in as the CEO of this company. How are you thinking about the founding scientific expertise, how that may be different from what we see outside in big tech, maybe with these visionary moonshots where you're trying to build something that, of course, has a different ceiling, different impact scale. What's the way you're thinking about the team and positioning this company now, coming in as the new CEO and building one of these great businesses, joining and augmenting the founding team?
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal question. And I think in medtech, it's certainly different than big tech. I think in tech, they get to such funding scales and then the personnel scales. I think they can make those types of founder forever roles work. Right. I don't think there's a successful Meta without Sheryl Sandberg. I don't think there's a successful SpaceX without, Glenn Shotwell. I think those types of people end up providing that operational expertise that I think helps those companies scale, helps them succeed. I think in medtech, you get to a point where the teams are so small, the funding is super limited, that I think the roles and the dynamic is a little bit different. But I feel that in most successful companies, I still see the founder, whether they're CEO or they're some other scientific role or technological visionary, they're always involved. And so I think the same holds true in medtech. And I think it's the great founders are those that understand their own area of brilliance and then try to bring around a team that helps elevate them. And for example, with CardiaCare, Amos is a visionary in the whole area of how can we treat atrial fibrillation and other cardiac arrhythmias differently. And I think without people like that, I would actually never be interested to take on this role. So if it was just, hey, go operationalize, there's almost no life, no soul of the company left, there's no vision forward, that's not exciting to me. At the end of the day, I'm still, a techie. I'm still, how can we change how healthcare is done? And so that gets me excited. That gets me up in the morning. So, part of our discussions was, with Amos, I want him just as involved, if not more than he was previously. I want this to be a very founder-led company. And I think, that happens all the time in medtech, and I see the great companies that succeeded, such as Shockwave, for example. The CEO, isn't always the founder, but that founder team was deeply entrenched, right? So I think that really becomes an important footprint and an important lesson to remember for medtech as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for answering the questions and doing this to me. And congratulations again on the new CEO role.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.